I'm Nora Bennett, 24 years old, and the morning my phone flashed with the words, valedictorian selected, the same old dread rose in my throat, like I'd made a mistake by hoping. In my head, I could already see 3 empty chairs at the front of a crowded auditorium reserved for a family that rarely took their seats, and I promised myself, just once more, I would ask them to come, because maybe this time would be different. I pressed their contact with a trembling thumb, and the call rang into a cheerful voicemail, the kind that sounds warm to strangers and hollow to the person who needs a real answer. I stared at my framed photos lining the wall, the ones where I learned to crop myself to make room for someone else's smile. Then I closed the calendar, picked up the formal invitations I'd lettered by hand, and decided I would not mail them, I would deliver them. Before I tell you what happened at the door and what it set in motion, I need you to hear how I got there. By the end of this, those empty chairs won't be a small detail. They will be the truth I refuse to live under. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever had to stand up when someone overlooked you, tap like and subscribe so this story finds someone who needs it tonight. I grew up in a small ranch house where the living room smelled faintly of lemon oil and older library books, the kind my father brought home on Friday nights when he felt like talking through someone else's story instead of his own. He believed in hard work and quiet rooms, and he measured success by how little trouble you caused. My mother kept a calendar full of charity luncheons and silent auctions, a rotation of pastel jackets and polished smiles, and if a camera appeared, she knew exactly where to stand, how to tilt her chin, and whose hand to hold for the picture. I was the kid who lined up my pencils in color order and paid late fees out of babysitting money because the town library felt like church to me. The first to school and the last to leave. Not because anyone demanded it, but because somewhere along the way, I learned that effort could be its own kind of shelter. Then, Jenna arrived 3 years younger and bright as a brass bell, and our house shifted a half-inch with each of her trophies. At first it was cute hair ribbons on the doorknob, and then it was entire weekends planned around choreography and travel. The air softening around her like a spotlight. You couldn't see, but you felt on your skin. We didn't have much, but we had rules. Bring your plate to the sink. Tell the truth, be kind. My father used to say people notice how you leave a room more than how you enter it, and I believed him, so I left rooms, tidy notes, thorough teachers thanked. When I hit high school and the guidance office stapled a list of scholarships to a manila folder with my name on it, I learned a new rule the hard way. If you want this, you'd better write file and follow up, because there isn't a safety net under the tightrope. I took shifts at the campus bookstore the week I turned 18, and I learned to stretch a budget the way some people learn scales, the rhythm of rent rice and used textbooks beating its own steady time in the background. The university was bigger and louder than anything I'd ever known, and the first time I walked past the old brick library, I touched the wall like I was greeting an old friend. Inside those stacks, a careful life could turn into a future, and I was disciplined enough to wait for it to take shape. The contrast caught me off guard in the beginning. The dining halls with their hum of laughter and casual abundance, the friends who swapped spring break plans and airfare deals like trading cards, the way people assumed you could say yes because money was a detail, not a decision. I said no more often than I liked and told myself there was dignity in that. When cheer season filled our family group chat with photos of Jenna in midair, my parents replied in bursts of exclamation points, and I learned to text grades directly to professors instead. I wasn't shut out of the conversation, exactly just placed at the edge of it, where the light didn't quite reach. The first time a professor called me remarkable, it felt like a word borrowed from someone else's story, and I set it gently on a shelf in my mind, beside the paperback copy of a journalist's memoir I kept with me like a compass. I wasn't chasing applause, not really. I just wanted to be seen standing in the doorway with my work in my hands the way our neighbors, the Greens, always seemed to manage 2 retired school teachers who waved from their porch and remembered my deadlines better than my parents did. By senior spring, my days thinned into a pattern of early mornings, and midnight edits a life most people only noticed when the awards came through. I wrote between the cafe tables and the thin hours of campus quiet, the steady scratch of ink keeping me company. Dr. Hartley, who ran the investigative journalism track, pressed her card into my palm after a seminar and said, "Keep your notes the way you keep your word," and I did, filling a lined notebook with date sources and the kind of small details you think won't matter until they do. Alvarez kept a chair open in her office, even when her calendar didn't, and the Greens saved a seat for me on their porch. Most Sundays, the three of us watching the streetlights wink on like a gentle curtain call for the day. I pressed on without asking for much, because asking meant measuring the answer, and I had learned not to set the ruler against something I couldn't change. The week the valedictorian email arrived, I printed the official notice twice, one for the registrar, one for my wall, and I took my calligraphy set from its box like it was a small ceremony. Thick cream envelopes, a steady hand and care in the curves of every name, including the two that always made me hesitate before the ink-touched paper, Harold and Diane Bennett. Grace offered to drive because she said my hands shook when I wrote family section, and I didn't argue. Lucas tucked the spare invitations into a folder and promised to meet us later, his camera slung over his shoulder like a familiar habit. At the Bennett front door, my mother answered in a zip-up sweatshirt and perfect ponytail, the kind of casual that still looked planned, and my father drifted into the frame behind her, checking his watch, though he didn't need to be anywhere right then. I spoke plainly, kept my shoulders back, told them there would be 3 seats reserved with our name on them first row, and that hearing me speak would mean more than I could put into words. My mother said they wouldn't miss it, the phrase landing light as tissue paper, and my father nodded like someone who had already agreed to too many things that day. Grace touched my elbow so gently I almost missed it, as if to remind me to breathe. I held their eyes for a half-second longer than I ever had, then placed the envelope in my mother's hand and thanked them for listening, because I was raised to leave a room kindly, even when it cost me something. On the walk back to the car, the invitation felt heavier in my chest than it had in my bag, and I told myself that promises sound different when you're the person who needs them. I buckled my seatbelt and looked at the street that had carried me through childhood birthdays, report cards, and quiet winters, and for a moment, the world seemed perfectly still, as if it were leaning forward to hear the next sentence. That night, my phone lit up with a new notification I didn't open right away. By morning, the shape of the week would change, and with it the balance of our family. The call came 3 days before graduation. My phone lit up with my father's name, and for a split second, I felt that same rush of hope I had carried since childhood. His voice was flat, almost rehearsed as he said they'd been talking. Jenna's cheer recruitment weekends had left them exhausted, and they were simply too tired to make the trip. I pressed my back against the wall of my room as the words landed, sliding slowly down to the floor. I managed to whisper that I understood, and his relief came through the line as though my quiet acceptance was all he had expected from me. He promised they'd watch the live stream. That was enough for them. The next morning, bleary from another restless night, I made coffee and scrolled through my phone while waiting for the machine to finish dripping. A splash of bright color caught my eye. My mother's social media account, which she rarely updated, showed fresh photos. There she was, smiling under oversized sunglasses, raising a champagne glass with Jenna by her side. The caption read, "Much-needed mother-daughter spa day. Treat yourself." The timestamp froze me. It was taken the very afternoon my father had called to say they were too tired to attend my graduation. I swiped again. There was my father seated across from them at a downtown restaurant, the 3 of them laughing together, time-stamped at the exact hour he had spoken to me. The story was plain to see. Their absence wasn't about fatigue, it was about choice. That afternoon, I locked myself in a bathroom stall at the library and scrolled backward through years of photos, the pattern emerging as though I were uncovering evidence in an investigation. My high school graduation had been skipped for a regional cheer competition. A journalism award night had been traded for a camp visit. Even my 18th birthday showed them smiling beside Jenna at a summer showcase while I blew out candles with neighbors in the background. The images formed a line too straight to deny, and my chest tightened with every scroll of my finger. A knock echoed in the tiled room. "Nora." It was Lucas's voice. "Grace thought you might be in here." His footsteps moved closer, then he slid down to sit against the wall outside my stall door. I could see the edge of his shoes through the gap. His voice was quiet, steady. I checked. 11 posts. Every single one celebrates Jenna on the same days they missed yours. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the stall. He looked up at me, his expression calm but unyielding. "They've never really seen you," he said. "That's not because you weren't worth seeing." His words landed with the force of something I had always suspected but never spoken out loud. Later that day, we met Grace at the coffee shop across from campus. She slid into the booth across from me, her eyes narrowing at the restless way I stirred my cup without drinking. "You're spiraling again," she said softly. "What's the point of accomplishing anything," I asked, "if the people who should care most don't even notice?" She reached over and placed her hand firmly on mine, stilling the spoon. "Your scholarship depends on graduating with honors. That program in New York is waiting for you. This is your last chance to speak the truth before you leave their orbit." Her voice was firm, not unkind, and I knew she was right. Still, the decision of what truth to tell lingered like a weight I could not set down. That evening, Lucas came by carrying 2 cardboard boxes. He set them on my floor and said he had found them in my parents' garage during a move the year before. Inside were family photo albums I had never opened since leaving home. I spread them across my rug and flipped slowly through the pages. In the earliest photos before Jenna was born, I was centered in the frame, my parents' arms wrapped around me. As the years passed, I was shifted further to the edge, my figure half visible or blurred, until eventually I disappeared from the photographs altogether. Seeing it laid out like this made the truth undeniable. I sat surrounded by those albums until late into the night, faced with a decision. My speech drafts were waiting on my desk. The neat, polished version that would thank the university and nod vaguely to family support, and the raw version written at 3 a.m. that told the story of invisibility and the cost of silence. One was safe, the other was a fracture I could never repair. The morning of graduation arrived bright and clear. Sunlight streamed through my window, catching on the cap and gown that hung waiting. My phone chimed with another notification. I opened it without thinking. A new post from my parents' account appeared, celebrating Jenna's prestigious summer internship at a marketing firm. Their words glowed with pride, the photo stamped with the same morning I was about to walk across the stage. Moments later, a text from my mother appeared. "We'll watch the live stream if we can. Send us photos." The words landed heavy, a casual dismissal written in plain script. I spat out the taste of toothpaste and braced myself against the sink, watching the foam swirl away as if it carried my expectations with it. Grace appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her gown. "Your sister's calling," she said, holding out my phone. I answered as I buttoned the collar of my blouse. Jenna's voice bubbled through the speaker. "Nora, I can't decide between the coral dress or the white one with the belt. Which looks better in photos?" Grace's eyebrows lifted as she mouthed silently, "Your thing." Jenna prattled on about tagging her post with proud sister and asked whether she should mention I was validating or whatever it was called. I corrected her quietly, valedictorian. She brushed past the correction and hung up, satisfied with her outfit choice. A minute later, a text buzzed in. "Congrats on being valedictorian," my father wrote, misspelling the very word. I set the phone aside, the silence in the room suddenly heavier than the morning air. Lucas arrived, then holding out a cup of coffee, his eyes steady on mine. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, but we both knew the truth lived in the shadows under my eyes and the weight I carried in my chest. On my desk sat 2 speech drafts side by side. The safe version was crisp and clean. The honest version bore smudges, rewrites, and coffee stains, but its words felt alive. I stared at them as Grace opened a small velvet box. Inside lay a silver pendant engraved in flowing script. "Your truth matters." She clasped it around my neck, her fingers warm against my skin. "I bought balcony tickets," she said with a smile. "Front row for whatever version you decide to give." I touched the pendant and breathed for the first time in days. In the hours before the ceremony, I sat alone in the preparation room, the 2 drafts spread before me. 4 years of grades of empty chairs, of invisible moments, balanced between the safety of silence and the cost of honesty. My phone buzzed again. Lucas had placed it beside me, the screen open to a new post my parents at a luxury spa Champagne raised the caption reading, "Relaxing before watching our girl's big moment on livestream." Hashtag self-care. I lifted the neat speech, tore it cleanly in half, and dropped the pieces into the trash. The sound echoed in the small room, final and sharp. For the first time in weeks, my reflection in the mirror met my gaze without faltering. My voice, when I whispered the first line of the honest draft, was clear and free of the stutter that had haunted me. They could ignore me, but they could no longer make me invisible to myself. Outside, Grace and Lucas worked quietly arranging neighbors Walter and Delia Green in the family section with proud smiles. They waved at me from their seats when I peeked through the curtain. Dr. Hartley shifted her family to leave a chair open for me in the faculty section, a gesture that carried its own kind of recognition. My bag held a folder of carefully documented absences, time-stamped posts and notes I had collected. Evidence should anyone doubt what I would say. The stage lights flickered as names were read, the air humming with anticipation. My turn was coming. My speech was ready. And the empty seats reserved for my parents sat waiting under the spotlight, more visible than they had ever been. When my name was called, I stepped onto the stage with the honest speech tucked inside my gown. The lights burned warm against my face, but my grip on the paper was steady. As I passed the front row, my eyes caught on the 3 empty chairs with our family name posted across the backs. The camera swept over them before turning toward the podium, making their absence impossible to miss. My pendant pressed cool against my skin, and I took a breath that carried me into the microphone. I began with formality, naming the president of the university, thanking the academic board, each word deliberate. The audience leaned forward, sensing that something different was coming. My voice did not crack when I spoke of being invisible in plain sight, or of what it means to be overlooked by those who should have been closest. A phone buzzed against the wood of the podium. I glanced down at the screen, the message glowing with my mother's name. "Couldn't you just thank us like normal graduates do?" It read. Without hesitation, I lifted the phone and held it up for the audience to see. My words were calm. This is what I received instead of their presence today. A murmur ran through the hall, but I kept my eyes on the crowd. In the family section, I saw Mr. and Mrs. Green, my neighbors from childhood, sitting straighter, as if to say they understood. Behind them, a projector flickered with a social media post from Jenna already defending herself. Her words claimed I was making everything about me that she had real commitments. I let the silence stretch before answering. When you speak truth, those who fear it will call it attention-seeking. But their reaction doesn't erase the reality. It only confirms it. The hall was so still, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning above us. My gaze returned to those empty seats, the placards with our names staring back at me under the lights. As I stand here looking at the spaces left open, I wonder if forgiveness can exist without acknowledgement of harm. I wonder if family ties can heal when only one side is willing to do the work. My voice held, though the weight of it pressed heavy in my chest. At the back of the hall, I caught sight of Grace holding her phone steady, recording from her seat, her other hand lifting in a small gesture of encouragement. Beside her, Lucas adjusted his camera to capture not just me, but the front row where the absence was plain. Dr. Hartley met my eyes from the faculty section and gave the smallest nod, her mouth lifting in the faintest encouragement. I finished the final lines of my speech with a voice that carried clearly through the microphone. When I stepped away, the president of the university shook my hand firmly and turned to the hall. His words commended my courage, saying education was not only about academics, but about finding the strength to speak hard truths. The applause rose in a wave as I walked off stage, my diploma case clutched against me. I barely reached the reception area before my phone lit up again. This time it was Jenna's name, not my parents'. Her voice on the other end sounded different, stripped of its usual edge. "I saw your speech," she said quietly. "Mom and Dad aren't saying anything, but their friends are. They're getting messages nonstop." She hesitated before adding, "I'm driving to campus. Alone. Can we talk?" I agreed, though I wasn't sure what to expect. Messages began flooding in as soon as I hung up. Mrs. Baxter, who taught piano lessons in our neighborhood, wrote to say she had always noticed. Mr. Collins from the Neighborhood Association said he wished he had spoken sooner. Even my mother's closest friend from college sent a message admitting she had seen the pattern but never named it. For the first time, the wall around my parents' behavior had visible cracks. 2 hours later, Jenna knocked at my dorm door, her cheer jacket pulled tight across her shoulders, though the June air outside was warm. Her knuckles tapped in a rhythm too practiced to be casual. When I opened the door, she stepped inside without waiting for me to speak. "You embarrass the whole family," she started, her tone echoing our mother's. "Dad hasn't stopped pacing since your speech hit social media." She crossed her arms and stared at me as if waiting for an apology. "They thought you might listen to me," she said finally. "They'll help with graduate school if you apologize. Say it was stress or that you exaggerated. If you don't, they'll cut ties. Is that what you want? To have no family at all?" I walked to my desk and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside lay the leather-bound journal I had kept since high school. I set it in her hands without explanation. She flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from defiance to confusion, then to something quieter. Each page listed a date, an event, and 2 columns, one for me, one for her. Mine showed check marks in only a few places, the rest marked with reasons scrawled in the margin. "Too tired, work conflict, Jenna needs us." Hers showed nearly every box filled. 42 of my events," I said softly. "They came to 9. 41 of yours. They missed 2. Jenna traced the neat lines with her finger, her lips parting as if to argue, then closing again without words. I reached for the letter tucked beside my graduation gown and held it up. "I don't need their money. I already have a full scholarship in New York." Saying it aloud felt like laying down a burden I had carried too long. "And I don't need their approval anymore." Jenna's eyes lifted to mine, uncertain for the first time. She sat in silence for a long moment, flipping through the pages again, the weight of evidence leaving no room for denial. "I never knew you kept track," she whispered. I answered simply, "You never had to." As the sun dropped lower outside my window, I surprised both of us with an invitation. "I'm meeting Grace and Lucas for dinner at Riverview. Come with me." Jenna hesitated, then nodded slowly. At the restaurant, the 4 of us sat at a table overlooking the river. Lucas raised his glass in a quiet toast, his eyes warm. Grace described the moment in my speech when the audience went silent, saying people were moved to tears. Jenna barely touched her food as she listened. She heard about the late nights in the library, the awards she had never known about, the times professors had praised my work. Each detail seemed to shift something in her expression. She watched the way Grace finished my sentences, the way Lucas rested his hand over mine without a second thought. Finally, she said softly, "I never realized how little I knew about your life." Her phone rang my mother's name, lighting up the screen. She answered, her eyes steady on mine. "I'm with Nora," she said, her voice stronger than before. A pause. Then, everything she said was true. I've seen the proof. When she ended the call, the table fell into a silence that felt different than before, not tense, but uncertain. Jenna looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "They want a family meeting tomorrow," she said. Dad sounded serious. She hesitated again before adding, "Can I stay here tonight? Being the golden child isn't as golden as you might think." Later, as I folded my graduation cords and placed them beside the journal on my desk, the weight of the day settled around me. Tomorrow would bring its own confrontation, but tonight I closed my eyes knowing my voice had been heard. For the first time, I fell asleep without waiting for a promise that might never come. Jenna stayed the night in my dorm, curled up on the spare blanket Grace had left behind. Her phone lit up with messages every hour, but she silenced it without reading, her shoulders tight, even in sleep. I sat at my desk, my graduation cords folded beside the journal, the 2 symbols of my story resting together. Tomorrow's family meeting loomed ahead, but for the first time, I felt steady. Whatever was said, I was no longer stepping into it empty-handed. The morning light filtered in cool and pale as we left for breakfast. Jenna walked a half step behind me, her jacket pulled close, her face unreadable. Grace joined us at the cafe, sliding into the booth with her usual calm. "Big day," she said quietly, her eyes flicking between us. Jenna stirred her coffee without drinking, her voice low. I don't know what they're going to say. Dad sounded serious. I nodded, but didn't answer. Some things didn't need words. By afternoon, the three of us, Jenna, Grace, and I, stood outside my parents' house. The driveway was full neighbors' cars lined along the curb, their presence drawn by whispers of tension. Inside, my mother's voice carried sharp and bright, greeting us at the door with a practiced smile. My father stood in the living room, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on me. We need to talk about what happened, he said. His tone was measured, but his jaw tightened with each word. The living room was arranged with precision, every cushion and frame in its place. Jenna sank into the sofa, and Grace stayed near the doorway, a silent anchor. My father's voice came first. You humiliated us in front of everyone. That was not the time or place. My mother followed quickly, her words like polished glass. We have supported you in our own way, but standing on stage and airing family matters, Nora, that was unfair. I listened steady, letting their words fall one by one without rushing to answer. When the silence stretched, I rose and placed the leather journal on the coffee table. My hand rested on the cover as I spoke. This is 4 years of records. Every event, every absence. I didn't create the pattern. I only documented it. Jenna leaned forward, flipping the book open to the page she had stared at the night before. The room grew quieter as the columns of check marks revealed themselves. My mother's face tightened, but she said nothing. My father's eyes dropped to the pages, and for the first time his voice faltered. I didn't realize that it looked like this. His words hung there brittle and thin. Jenna's voice broke the silence. It's true, Mom. She isn't making this up. I've seen it. You were there for me almost always, but not for her. My mother's hand gripped the armrest, her knuckles pale. We did what we thought was best, she said softly. Grace shifted near the doorway, her presence a reminder that the room wasn't closed off, that truth could not be pulled back once it was spoken. I felt my pendant warm against my collarbone, the engraved words grounding me. I pulled the letter from my desk drawer and placed it beside the journal. I have a full scholarship to graduate school in New York. I don't need your financial help. I don't need approval. But I needed to be honest about what this has been. My father's eyes flicked to the letter, then back to me. His shoulders sagged, the fight slipping out of him. My mother pressed her lips together, her gaze darting to Jenna, then away. For a long time, the only sound was the clock ticking on the mantel. Finally, Jenna spoke again. I'm tired of pretending everything's perfect. She deserved better. And I can't keep carrying the role you gave me as if it makes up for what you denied her. Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. The air in the room shifted thinner, sharper, like the first breath after a storm. My parents said nothing more. The silence itself was an answer. When we left, the late afternoon sun slanted across the street, long shadows stretching over the pavement. Grace walked on one side of me, Jenna on the other, none of us speaking until we reached the car. Jenna let out a long breath, her shoulders lowering as though she had set down a weight she'd carried for years. I can't go back in there tonight, she whispered. I nodded. You don't have to. That evening, the three of us gathered again at Riverview. The river shimmered under the fading light, and our table filled with the smell of fresh bread and warm dishes. Lucas joined us this time, his camera bag slung over his chair, his presence steady as always. We talked in quiet tones, the conversation circling around the day without needing to dissect every word. Jenna listened more than she spoke, her eyes moving between us, watching the ease of our rhythm. When she finally spoke, her words were small, but clear. Maybe it's time I start seeing things the way you do. The night ended without celebration, only a quiet calm that settled over us as we walked back to campus. I placed my cords and the journal side by side on my desk, once more symbols of truth that could no longer be ignored. The house behind me still carried silence and denial, but here in this space, something new was forming. Tomorrow would bring its own shift, but tonight I felt the first breath of freedom, steady and sure. The morning after the family meeting, I woke with an unexpected stillness in my chest. Jenna was already up, perched on the windowsill with her knees drawn close, scrolling through her phone in silence. She looked tired, but more present than I had ever seen her. When she turned, her expression was wary, as though she wasn't sure where she belonged. "They want us back at the house tonight," she said. I nodded slowly, aware of the weight those words carried. At breakfast, Grace slid a cup of coffee toward me and placed her hand lightly on mine. "Whatever happens, you don't have to protect them anymore," she said. Lucas sat across from us, his camera resting at his feet, watching me carefully. His voice was steady. "People saw what you said. You can't go back to silence now." Their certainty steadied me in a way I hadn't expected. For years I had spoken in half-truths, but now the choice felt clear. That afternoon I sat at my desk with both versions of my speech still folded in a drawer. The torn pieces of the safe draft were crumpled at the bottom, but the honest draft still carried the lines I had written at 3 a.m. I read them again and again, feeling each word take root. For so long, silence had been my way of keeping peace, but peace had only ever belonged to everyone else. I gathered the folder of documents, time-stamped posts, absences, and the journal, and placed it beside my cords, evidence of what had been paired with proof of what I had earned. By evening, I found myself back in the preparation room of the auditorium. The walls carried the faint echo of my own footsteps from the day before. Grace leaned against the doorway, her eyes calm. "Are you ready?" she asked. Lucas set his tripod in the corner, adjusting the lens with practiced hands. This time he said quietly, "Make sure they see everything." His words weren't pressure, just a reminder. The pendant around my neck felt warm, the engraving pressing gently against my skin. When the program began, the hall filled with the same hum of anticipation I had felt the day before. This time, though, the weight on my shoulders had shifted. I walked out with the honest speech in hand, the paper soft from being folded and unfolded too many times. The audience settled into silence as I began. My words traced the outline of invisibility, of growing up at the margins of photographs, of searching for recognition where it never arrived. I paused only once when my phone lit up again on the podium. Another message from my mother, short and sharp. I lifted it to the audience as I had before, letting them see it for themselves. A ripple moved through the hall, but I didn't waver. My voice carried over the silence, firm and measured. "You can ignore me, but you cannot erase me." The applause that followed was different this time, louder, but also heavier, as though people understood the cost of what I had said. The university president rose again, his voice resonant, as he thanked me for reminding everyone of what education truly meant. My steps off stage were lighter than they had been the day before. Grace and Lucas were waiting, both of them standing taller, their eyes proud. The folder under my arm felt less like a burden now, and more like armor I had finally chosen to wear. Outside, the evening air was cool against my face. Jenna walked beside me, her jacket zipped high, her expression unreadable. After a long silence, she spoke. "You didn't flinch. Not once." Her voice held something new, part surprise, part respect. She didn't say more, but she didn't need to. The distance between us had shifted, subtle but real. For the first time in years, she wasn't speaking at me. She was speaking to me. Later that night, as I placed the journal and cords side by side again, I understood that I had crossed a line I could never return from. The safe version of myself was gone. What remained was the voice I had always carried but never trusted. Tomorrow would bring its own reckoning with my parents, but tonight I had taken the first step into something larger than their silence. The next day began with silence from my parents. No messages, no calls, no invitations to talk further. I half expected my mother to arrive at my dorm, rehearsed smile in place, but she didn't. Instead, Jenna sat at my desk, flipping through the journal again, as though the pages might change if she stared long enough. "They're pretending it didn't happen," she said finally, her voice low. But it did. She closed the book and set it down carefully, her shoulders heavy with the admission. By late morning, Lucas arrived with his camera gear. He placed a USB drive on my desk. "Footage from the ceremony," he said, "including the family section." His eyes lingered on me. "Do you want to see it?" I hesitated before nodding. He plugged it into my laptop and the screen filled with images of me at the podium. The camera swept across the auditorium, pausing on the 3 empty seats marked with our family name. The emptiness was sharper on film than it had been in person. Jenna pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes watering. "It's worse when you see it from the outside," she whispered. Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. That evening, my parents called for another meeting. This time, I insisted we gather at the university lounge rather than the house. Grace came with me, steady as ever, and Lucas positioned himself quietly at the back with his equipment. My parents arrived side by side. My mother's expression set my father's gaze darting to the floor. They sat across from me, their voices cool and deliberate. My mother spoke first. "You've created a spectacle, Nora. Our friends are calling, asking questions. Do you understand what you've done to this family's reputation?" My father followed quickly. "You could have handled this privately. Instead, you turned us into a public embarrassment." Their words landed in familiar patterns, but this time I didn't fold under them. I opened the folder of evidence on the table, sliding the photographs and time-stamped posts toward them. "I didn't create this pattern," I said quietly. "You did. I only chose not to hide it anymore." My mother's lips pressed tighter, but she said nothing. My father leafed through the pages, his face unreadable. Jenna spoke suddenly, her voice firm. "She's not lying. I've seen it all. She's been invisible for years, and you never noticed. You made it about me, always me, and I let you." Her words hung in the air like something long overdue. For a moment, the room was utterly still. My mother's eyes flashed, her jaw tightening, but my father's hands trembled slightly as he set the papers down. "Maybe," he said slowly, "maybe we should have done things differently." My mother turned sharply toward him, but he didn't meet her gaze. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was more than I had ever heard from him. Grace leaned forward, her presence a quiet shield at my side. "The truth doesn't disappear because it's uncomfortable," she said softly. My parents stood not long after retreating with words left unsaid, leaving the evidence spread across the table. Their exit felt like a closing door, but one I no longer needed to chase. When they were gone, I gathered the papers, sliding them back into the folder with deliberate care. Jenna's voice broke the silence. "I think I believed I was lucky, but I wasn't. I was just the one they saw." She looked at me, her eyes searching. What happens now, I didn't have an answer, but I knew the ground beneath me had shifted. The truth was out, and the roles we had lived under no longer fit. That night, back in my dorm, Grace handed me a small envelope. Inside was a printed program for a journalism symposium scheduled for the fall with my name listed as a panelist. "They asked for you after seeing your speech," she said with a smile. "Your words are traveling farther than you realize." I traced the letters of my name, feeling the weight of the moment. It wasn't just about my family anymore. It was about what voice could do when it was finally used. Jenna stayed again that night, her phone buzzing constantly with calls she didn't answer. As she settled onto the spare blanket, she whispered, "You were brave. I don't know if I could have done it." I turned off the lamp, the room dimming into quiet, and answered softly, "Neither did I," until I had no choice. The silence stretched between us, not heavy this time, but open as if something new might grow there. In the morning, I found another letter slid under my door. The handwriting was my father's, angular and careful. I held it in my hands for a long moment before opening it. The first line read, "I abandoned my own writing dreams at your age." His words spoke of regrets unacknowledged, of absences he couldn't erase, and though he didn't offer excuses, he also didn't offer a full apology. He admitted he saw pieces of himself in me, and that my success reminded him of choices he never made. The letter ended without resolution, only a signature. I folded it carefully and placed it beside the journal, uncertain what to do with it. Later that day, Lucas, Grace, and I met at the riverfront. The air was cool, the water rippling against the edge. Lucas raised his camera toward me. "Want to say something for yourself this time?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. The lens focused, and for the first time I spoke not to my parents, not to the auditorium, but to myself. The words came quietly, steady, measured. "I'm not invisible anymore." When I finished, Lucas lowered the camera and smiled. Grace squeezed my hand, her eyes warm. Jenna stood beside us, listening, her face unreadable but her presence solid. For once, she didn't need to say anything. The following week, I received a call from Mrs. Green. Her voice was warm but serious. "Your parents invited us for coffee," she said. "They want to explain themselves." I sat in silence for a long moment, then agreed to come. If nothing else, it was time for everything to be said aloud, where others could hear. That Saturday, the Greens opened their home for the gathering. Their living room smelled faintly of lemon polish, the same as when I was a child. Harold and Diane arrived together carrying a plate of store-bought pastries, as if the gesture could soften what hung between us. Grace sat beside me, Lucas at my other side, his camera resting quietly on the floor. Jenna lingered near the window, her arms crossed, watching. My mother began almost immediately. "We've been misunderstood," she said, her voice tight. "We've supported Nora in ways that may not have been visible, but we were always proud." My father nodded, though his eyes did not meet mine. "We worked hard to give both our daughters opportunities," he added. "Maybe we made mistakes, but we did our best." Their words sounded practiced, a performance rehearsed for this room. I let the silence stretch before opening the folder once more. I placed the journal in the center of the coffee table and flipped to a page in the middle. These are dates, events, my records. My hand didn't shake as I slid it toward them. The Greens leaned forward, their faces drawn as they read. Walter cleared his throat. "I remember these," he said softly. "Diane, Harold, we were there. Nora sat with us more times than I can count because you weren't." His voice was steady, not accusing, only factual. The weight of it filled the room. My mother's face flushed, her hands twisting in her lap. "We had Jenna's schedule. You don't understand," she began, but Delia's voice cut gently through hers. "We do understand. We saw it. And we stayed quiet longer than we should have." The room stilled, every word landing like a stone in water. Grace rested her hand lightly on mine, a reminder of the steady ground beneath me. Then Jenna spoke, her voice sharper than I had ever heard it in front of our parents. "Stop pretending. You gave me everything because it was easier. You left her out because she never complained. I'm done carrying the role you pushed on me." My father's eyes widened, his mouth opening, as if to answer, but no words came. For the first time, it wasn't me standing alone. I reached into the folder again and lifted the letter my father had slipped under my door. I placed it in front of him. "You said you abandoned your own dreams. That doesn't excuse what you abandoned in me." His face paled, his hand hovering over the paper without picking it up. My mother looked away, her eyes fixed on the floor. The silence stretched until Lucas quietly adjusted his camera, the click reminding everyone the moment was being recorded. Finally, Harold spoke. His voice was low, unsteady. "I can't undo the past, but maybe I can acknowledge it." He looked at me, really looked for the first time in years. "I should have been there. We should have been there." My mother's lips pressed tight, but she didn't argue. She only whispered, "I'm sorry," the words barely audible. They were not enough to erase years of absence, but for the first time they were spoken. Walter leaned back in his chair, his expression grave but calm. "Nora has built herself without your applause. What happens now is up to you, but the truth can't be hidden again." His words settled over us, final and steady. My parents sat in silence, the pastries untouched on the table between us. When the meeting ended, I gathered my journal and letter, tucking them into my bag. Grace and Lucas walked with me out into the late afternoon sun. Jenna lingered a moment longer, then joined us, her expression unreadable, but her steps certain. "That was the first time I've heard them admit anything," she said softly. I nodded, the pendant at my neck warm against my skin. For the first time, their silence had been broken. That night, as I placed the journal back on my desk, I felt a shift I couldn't ignore. Justice wasn't about winning a single argument. It was about finally having the truth spoken where it couldn't be denied. Tomorrow would come with its own questions, whether repair was possible or whether distance was the only way forward. But tonight I closed my eyes knowing that the weight no longer belonged to me alone. 3 months later, my apartment walls in New York told a different story than the ones I grew up with. Where old photographs once reminded me of empty chairs, now framed articles from the Metro Journal filled the space, each byline carrying my name. My graduation cords rested neatly on a shelf, not as a reminder of absence, but as proof of what I had carried through. Grace and Lucas were nearby, their lives interwoven with mine in this new city, steady as ever. Even Jenna called from time to time, her voice softer, now her questions less about appearances and more about honesty. Our relationship was fragile, but it was real in a way it had never been before. One morning an email arrived with a subject line that made me pause: Speaker Invitation Truth and Personal Narrative Symposium. My alma mater wanted me to return this time, not as a student, but as a keynote speaker. 6 months earlier, I would have rushed to call my parents, begging them to attend, waiting for their recognition. Instead, I accepted without hesitation, marking the date on a calendar already filled with goals of my own choosing. For the first time, my future didn't hinge on anyone else's approval. The days unfolded with a steadiness I hadn't known before. I mentored younger writers who were uncertain about telling their own stories, and I found myself repeating words that had once been given to me. Your truth matters, even when it makes others uncomfortable. One student, nervous about writing about her family, looked at me with wide eyes and whispered, "What if it changes everything?" I smiled gently and told her, "It probably will. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't write it." In those moments I understood that what I had lived through had become something larger than myself. It had become a kind of offering. Not long after, a package arrived at my door. Inside were old photographs I had never seen, me at 5 years old with a ribbon in my hair, me at 7 holding a story I had written. Alongside them was a short note from my mother. The words were simple. I kept these hidden. "I'm sorry." I sat with the letter for a long time, neither rejecting nor embracing it, only acknowledging it for what it was. A gesture, perhaps the first real one she had made toward me in years. My father's earlier letter stayed tucked in my desk, unread most days, but not forgotten. Small steps, but steps nonetheless. That evening, Grace and Lucas came over with a bottle of champagne, their laughter filling the small kitchen as we celebrated my first published series at the paper. The glasses clinked softly, the sound clear and bright. "To seeing yourself clearly even when others don't," Grace said. Lucas added with a grin, "and to building family where it matters most." I raised my glass, my throat tight with quiet gratitude. In that moment, I knew the family I had chosen was every bit as real as the one I had been born into. When I think back on it now, the lesson feels simple but hard-earned. Recognition from others is fragile. It disappears, it disappoints, it shifts with their moods. But recognition of yourself, of your worth and your work, that is something no one can take away. Empty chairs no longer define my story. The people who stand beside me now, by choice and with constancy, are the ones who matter most. And the truth, I spoke the truth, that once frightened me, is the very thing that opened the door to the life I live today. So, if you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever sat at the edge of a room wondering when it would be your turn, let me tell you this: your turn begins when you decide your story matters. And it does. Before you go, I'd love for you to share your own reflections in the comments, times you found strength in speaking your truth, or moments when you built a new kind of family. And if this story stayed with you, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.